Welcome, everyone, to our mini-series as part of Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut. This is Mysteries of Creation. So tonight, we are going to really zone in on one particular pasuk and one particular midrash. So the verse that we're going to be doing, if anyone wants to look, it's in the first chapter of Genesis, the 26th verse, 126. And I'm just doing the first half of the verse. And that is, V'yomer Elokim na'aseh Adam b'tzalmenu u'kedumutenu. And God said, let us make man in our image and our likeness. So, like every verse in the Torah, every word in the Torah, there is so much to say about this. And we're going to be looking at one midrash that it answers a question that everyone asks. What does it mean when God says, let us make man? Who is the us? The whole rest of creation is simply God saying, let something come into being, and it came into being. There was no mention of a plural us. So this is a question that everyone asks. And the Midrash, as we're going to see, gives 5 different explanations. Now, we've discussed this many times. When you have 5 different explanations, if one looks at it from, we'll call it a Western mind, it's like, okay, here's 5 different possibilities. Which one is right? For those who are here on the Sunday class, we actually discussed this in great detail. This idea of when different opinions are given, how do you deal with that? So in this particular midrash, 5 different ideas are given. And I didn't look at the chat. I want to ask someone. I sent in the WhatsApp this week the chart that we're going to be using tonight. So I just want to let everyone know, if you look in your WhatsApp, we sent it yesterday, you'll have the chart that we are discussing, even without the chart. Okay, so I see Ephraim just shared it. So anyone who's not on the WhatsApp group, please go to your chat and you'll see from the Or Chadash office the link to the chart that we're going to be using the whole evening. I'm going to be discussing, so if for any reason I'm not sure if Ephraim saw that chat to send the telegram, but we'll see that if he does. Anyways, this is what we're going to be dealing with, this one midrash, and we could ask, well, which one of these who is the us here? And so very, very typically, we don't look at it this way. From a Jewish point of view, it's all of these are true. Ephraim says the link will open in the browser. Okay, so we're going to go through these 5 possibilities, and they're all based on the idea when it says, and God said, let us make man. So this is in the Midrash Rabbah. This explanation, this Midrash is 2,000 years old, and it explains that when God says, let us He was speaking to something or someone. The question is, who is he speaking to? And the understanding is God was asking counsel about the creation of man. In other words, how to make man. Remember, we're in the 6th day of creation. We're not at the 1st day. Human beings were created on the 6th day. In fact, they were the last creation. And so God is consulting with one or all of these 5 possibilities. I like to see it as it was all 5. That is an all-inclusive way to understand this. So the first explanation is God consulted with creation itself, because human beings were the last thing to be created. And in a sense, when we look at the word Adam, so the Aleph of Adam is the soul, the spiritual element of a human being, and the word Dam is the blood, is the body. So a human being is a component of spiritual and physical, of as it were, above and below. And here, though, God is consulting with all of creation, and we can understand that it wasn't only consulting, but was including all of creation in the creation of human beings. So this is a very, very fundamental idea of human consciousness. And of course, there's been thousands of songs or poems or books written about human consciousness and its connection to the animal world, to the vegetable world, to the mineral world. And this is not an intellectual idea. Anytime we go out into nature and we're walking by a stream next to beautiful trees, and birds are singing and squirrels are running up and down the tree, well, that's all of creation is right there. You have the mineral, you have the vegetable, you have the animal, and you have the human. But it's all being processed through human consciousness. And so the first idea of who the us is, let us make man, is God not just consulted, but in a sense included elements of all of creation in the making of man. And this is actually connected to the Parsha. The Zohar says that Avram buried Sarah in Kiryat Arba, Hebron. Kiryat Arba, that is Hebron. Now, there's 2 names for the same place. And we discussed that today, right next to the city of Hebron is, call it a suburb, called Kiryat Arba. Right next to Hebron, for all practical purposes, it's part of Hebron. But the Zohar says an interesting thing. Kiryat Arba means the city of 4. And Rashi explains the 4 are the 4 pairs or 4 couples that are buried there. Adam and Eve, Avram and Sarah, Yitzchak and Rivka, and Yaakov and Leah. 4 different couples. So it's called Kiryat Arba. Rashi also brings the tradition that at that time there were 4 giants living in Hebron. But the Zohar says, what's the 4 here, the city of 4? So it explains that these are the 4 elements that make up reality: fire, earth, air, and water. And the Zohar goes on to explain the role of these 4 elements in creation. So that dovetails very much with what we're learning here, is when God said, let us make man in our image and our likeness. So there's something about man that includes the whole world. That's why the Arizal said, it's a short little expression, but it has profound meaning, is that Adam is a small world. The world is a big Adam. Adam is a small world. In other words, within a person is everything is there. Everything's included. And if you look at that's the microcosm. You look at the macrocosm, it's as if it's one big Adam. That is what the entire universe is. So this is the first idea of the Midrash, that God consulted with and in a sense included, had them take part in the creation of human beings. The second one is very similar, but it's a little bit more specific. And that is that Hashem asked the advice, took counsel of each day of creation. The first opinion was like this overall general consultation with all of creation. But then God, in a sense, made it more specific and consulted with each day of creation. And at one point, Rashi, in a slightly different context, said that God wanted to make sure that there was an even balance between those things that were created in the heavens and those things that were created in the earth. So neither one would say, the creation is more balanced towards the upper reality, upper beings, or just the opposite, that the lower creation, lower beings wouldn't complain. And so actually Rashi says that's why a human being is a composite of above and below, of spiritual and physical, to keep the balance of creation. So the second opinion is that God was consulting with each day of creation and making sure that they all felt part of the creation of human beings, because human beings are considered the crown of creation. In fact, the purpose of creation. But God did not want imbalance and did not want anyone left out. The third opinion is God consulted with the angels as to whether to create human beings. And there are a number of different midrashim about call it the conversation that happens between the angels and human beings. And in a different midrash, not this midrash, but a different midrash, the idea given over is that there was actually a disagreement among the angels themselves. And some said, don't create human beings. They will not be truthful. They will not be faithful. And other ones said, that might be true, but they'll have a good streak about them. They'll know how to do chesed. And so in this midrash, it says that God took truth, because that's what the angels were saying. They will not be truthful. And he threw truth down to the earth and said, from now on, truth will sprout from the earth. And there's an expression, emet me'aretz titzmach. The first three letters of those words, emet me'aretz titzmach, means that truth will sprout from the earth. But if you look at those three words, the first word emet has an aleph. The second word me'aretz has a mem. Titzmach has a tav. That spells emet, spells truth. Truth will sprout from the earth. So that's a different midrash about the angels themselves were, call it, conflicted as to what kind of counsel to give to God. But why did God feel that he had to consult with the angels? Again, I mentioned in the last time that God did not want jealousy among his creation. And because many, many different midrashim about the relationship between angels and mankind, God wanted to include them, make them feel empowered in the creation of human beings. There's a very, very famous midrash that when Moshe was on Mount Sinai, so the angels came and said to God, what is a creation of flesh and blood doing up here among the angels? And they further said, why are you giving the primordial Torah to human beings? How could they even possibly understand the primordial Torah? And so God says to Moshe, you answer them. So Moshe, I'm just paraphrasing it, he picks a number of things in the Torah and asks the angels, did you go down to Egypt? Were you ever a slave? Do you have a yetzer hara? Do you have an evil inclination? Why would you think that the Torah doesn't apply to us? And so the question is asked. I'm not going to go deeply into this, but for those who have fruits of the orchard, I'll ask you to, not now, but go to Parshat Devarim, the first portion of Deuteronomy, and you'll see a very lengthy Torah called the Primordial Torah that deals with this question as to what were the angels thinking? What, they didn't know what was in the Torah, that they would say, why are you giving the Torah to human beings? So, B'li Neder, on Thursday's WhatsApp, I'll post this article. Anyways, going back, this is the third idea in the Midrash who God took counsel with the angels. So since we're talking about this, just a little bit of the role of angels in reality. What are we talking about here? So there's a very well-known Talmudic statement that says a blade of grass does not grow unless its angel or its mazal hits it and says, grow. This is a blade of grass. Now, that we will expand to all of reality. And the idea here is that what we'll call the lower worlds and the upper worlds are intrinsically connected. And nothing moves in this world without a inspiration or incentive or action from above. And then we have the opposite idea also, that we have the power to affect the upper worlds. So that it's a mirror image, just like we talk about the lower Jerusalem, the earthly Jerusalem is right below the heavenly Jerusalem. But this symbolizes the idea that the upper worlds and the lower worlds are intrinsically is not even a sufficient word. They're totally, completely connected. And so angels are this messenger force of the upper worlds that it is connected to every blade of grass, to every atom, to every particle, has a equal connective energy above. And what's interesting is that in modern physics, usually when we talk about angels, one of the two best ways to describe angels, that they are energy, like packets of energy, and that they are messengers. The type of angels that we meet in the Bible, in the Tanakh, are almost always carrying messages from God in different circumstances. We saw it in last week's Parsha, when Avram was about, seemingly, to offer up Yitzchak. An angel came and said, stop, don't do it. So throughout the Bible, angels are messengers. So it's very interesting that in modern physics, when they get down into the atom, when they get down to the forces of the universe, that certain particles are called messenger particles. These are particles that transmit the forces of creation. That is their job. They take the messages from one particle to the other, and that's what creates reality. So every entity in the lower worlds, including human beings, have angels that are connected with them. Where do we see this story? We see it very, very much in Rashi's explanation of when Yaakov has a dream of a ladder spanning the earth to the heavens. And it says there were angels going up and down the ladder. So why were the angels going up in the ladder? So Rashi brings the tradition that there's certain angels of Eretz Yisrael and certain angels of the rest of the world. So Yaakov was on his way to leave Israel. He's going to his parents' family to find a wife, and he will be leaving Israel. So Rashi says that the angels that accompanied him in Israel, so they were going up the ladder. In other words, their purpose had, for the time being, had finished. And the angels coming down, they were the ones from outside of Israel who would take over the role of accompanying Yaakov out of Israel. And we see that when Yaakov 20 years later comes back, again he sees angels, and he names the place Machanaim, the encampment, because again the angels are switching now. He's coming back to Israel. So he perceives the angels coming back and the ones who were outside of Israel leaving. And we see it one other time when Yaakov is coming back, And he knows now he's going to have to meet Esav again. And so the Parsha Vayishlach begins, Vayishlach Malachim El Esav. That Yaakov sent messengers to Esav. What does Rashi say? 2 words, Malachim Mamish. Angel, real angel, not what we want. The easy translation is messengers. Rashi says mamash, malachim mamish. That's where we get the word mamish from. Malachim mamish. That's a very big word here in Israel. Mamish. So the idea again is God is taking counsel with the angels, and he wants them to have input. But like we saw from other midrashim, that there was even a disagreement among the angels. Nonetheless, God wanted to include them in the decision and the implementation of making human beings. Next is the 4th opinion of this midrash, and this is the one that is most quoted. This is the one. It doesn't mean the other ones are incorrect or less important, but here it's the one that's brought the most time, is that God took counsel with the souls of the tzaddikim, which leads to another question. Who are these tzaddikim that he's taking counsel with? There's no world yet. Actually, here it's even more than man, because in a different midrash, it says that God took counsel with the tzaddikim before he created the world. Before he created the world. And the same question, who are these tzaddikim? And the answer is, these are the future souls of Israel, that because the souls of Israel are an actual part of God above, they were part of God's decision to create the world. Here, we're talking specifically about this pasuk of should we create man or not. Now, here we're talking about man in the physical world. Just like there are angels above that are connected to every blade of grass, so we're in this world, our souls are in this world, but we're taught that the vast majority of our soul, it still remains above. The root of our soul is not necessarily in this world. And we're told that the more righteous a person is, the more pure a person is, the more connected to God a person is, the more they can draw the root soul into this world to help them act in this world. So here, the idea that tzaddikim is the collective soul of Israel. And throughout the Zohar, the concept of the collective soul of Israel is identified with the Shekhinah, to the point that they're, in a sense, interchangeable. Now here again, we're talking about the collective pure soul of Israel is sometimes referred to as the Shekhinah. The terms are interchangeable. And so here in the 4th idea, we're touching on something very, very, very profound here. And that is that, and we're going to see it in the 5th idea of who God was consulting with. Here, it's as if God is consulting with his feminine side. That's the implication here. We know throughout the Zohar, we have this idea of Kudsha Brichu V'Shchinte, the Holy One, blessed be He, and the Shekhinah, which we will translate as God's immanent presence in this world, which is considered feminine. And so that's how the Arizal came up with this, call it Kabbalistic intention, that before we say a blessing or do a mitzvah, so we say l'shem yichud kudsha brichu v'shchinte liyached shem yudke b'vavke v'yichuda shalim b'shem kol Yisrael. For the sake of unifying the Holy One, blessed be He, and His Shekhinah, in order to unite the four letters of God's name, the Yud and the He and the Vav and the He, in the name of all of Israel. So here we're dealing with a very, very profound idea here, is that God, in a sense, is taking counsel within himself, but within himself there is what we'll call masculine and feminine energies. And so if we're going to do some like logic here, if the collective soul, Knesset Yisrael, is identified with the Shekhinah, so when it says that God took counsel with the souls of the tzaddikim, it's as if saying God took counsel with the soul, with the energy of his own feminine aspect. So we can see this is a very deep idea. Now remember, this verse is, God said, let us make man, human beings, in our image, in our likeness. So of course, this has much discussion. What does it mean to be in God's image? What does it mean to be in God's likeness? So we know that we're not talking about a physical likeness or image, because God has no image or likeness that we can even vaguely relate in a physical way. So what does it mean? So many ideas are put forward. The one that I've always leaned towards is the idea of free will, that this is what the rest of creation doesn't have, is free will, including the angels. But here we see another aspect, which is, like I say, very, very profound. God created Adam, male and female. He created them. And of course, our tradition is that it was an androgynous being. And then God physically separated the male component from the female component. And then said that that's why a man leaves his mother and father and clings to his wife, and they become one flesh. So male and female at one time were one. And we learned this in a previous class. It's called one becomes two in order to become one. And so here, though, we can understand in a very, very deep way that to be in God's image and God's likeness is the reality of masculine and feminine. Because within God's being, even though in God's essence, there is no male and female. There is no division between transcendent and immanent. That's only when it begins to descend in the world from our perspective. In God's essence, it's all one. Or as it says in the Kabbalah, that in Atika Kadisha, there is no left and right. It's only right. It's all unified. But from our perspective and the way that God relates to the world, there is masculine and feminine. God's masculine energy is transcendence. The feminine is actually God's immanent energy. God's more masculine energy is the name Yud-Ke Vav-Ke. God's more feminine is Elohim. And then it all filters down to a human being. Now, once Adam and Eve were separated, Adam, now the masculine Adam, retains a certain feminine consciousness. And Eve retains a certain amount of masculine consciousness, and that is true to this day. We all have both elements, but we have a primary and a secondary. And without getting into it, there seems to be mass confusion in the world today about this issue. I don't want to enter any more into that right now. And then we can go one more step. In other words, from God's perspective, there's transcendent and there's immanent. That's actually from our perspective. And then it filters down to a human being, but it also filters down to the animals, and it filters down to just the energy in the universe, down to the atomic molecular energy of positive and negative. Negative not meaning negative, just polar. All of reality is polar energy. It says, Zeh lumat zeh asa Elohim. This against this did God make. So from the atom and the particles and the molecular structure of the universe through the vegetation also has male and female. And then you have the animals and you have humans, and even within the God divine level, we have male and female. And so here, just to sum this up, the fourth idea of this midrash is that God, in a sense, is taking counsel with his feminine part. Now, Rav Ginsburg mentions an amazing thing here, and he says that in this context, Israel is the wife of God. And we see this, of course, in the Song of Songs, where the male in the story is an allegory of God, and the female is Israel. And throughout the prophets, they use this metaphor as a brit between God and the Jewish people, but a brit of marriage, brit nesuin, a covenant of marriage between God and Israel. And so Rav Ginsburg said, I found this so interesting, is that God told Adam not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And it appears that Adam told Eve, and then he added, don't touch it either. But obviously there was something lacking in that communication. That it didn't get through sufficiently to Eve the importance of this commandment, this instruction. And actually, Reb Shlomo says an amazing thing, is what Adam didn't realize is when God told him not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, he didn't realize he had to pray to have the wisdom and the strength to fulfill that mitzvah. And Reb Shlomo said that this is a teaching for all of us. Is actually Rabbi Nachman says this, that a person needs to daven about everything. Nothing is just as simple as it seems. That sometimes we have to pray in order to be able to pray. Because sometimes we don't do that, and we end up just doing it by rote. We just mumble the words. And we have to pray in order to be able to pray. We have to pray to have strength to do just about anything. And so here, Rav Ginsburg says it appears that Adam, he didn't like consult with his wife. They didn't talk about it. They didn't discuss what it means not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil and why and all of that. And then Rav Ginsburg says that Adam and Eve are incarnated into Avram and Sarah. And actually this came up in our Fruits of the Orchard class, is why didn't Sarah know that Avram was taking Yitzchak for the Akedah? Because the Midrashim say that once she found out, I'm not saying that the Torah says it, but we can understand she died of shock. She had a heart attack. She died of shock, and it appears she didn't understand, she didn't know. So Rav Ginsburg said that Avram and Sarah fixed so much of what Adam and Chava did wrong. But here was an example where Avram did not consult with Sarah. Even though previously God said, everything that Sarah says to you, listen to her voice. Here, Avram did not consult with her. But then Rav Ginsburg says, so did a tikkun ever happen for this energy? So he says, yes, by Yaakov. When after 20 years, God came to Yaakov and said, it's time that you and your family return to Israel. Yaakov was now married to really 4 women. The primary ones were Rachel and Leah, and he had all these children. And God came to him with an instruction. And yet Yaakov went to Rachel and Leah and discussed it with them and took counsel from them. And in the end, they said, everything that God told you, we're aboard. That's what we're doing. And Rav Ginsburg said that was a tremendous tikkun. So why did he mention all of this? Again, to understand why did God consult the souls of the tzaddikim, is because that's like God consulting with his wife. And he wanted to make sure that he consulted with his wife in metaphoric terms, so everyone would be on board, just like the angels would be on board, and each day of creation would be on board, and all of creation in the most general way would be on board. The last of the 5 opinions, who did God take counsel with when he said, let us make human beings? So the Midrash says he took counsel with his heart. He took counsel with his heart. Well, what does that mean? So we can understand if we go back to the end of Parshat Noach, where it says that God saw that the actions of man were very, very evil. And it says, and God regretted in his heart. These are the very words in the Torah. He regretted in his heart that he had made man. Give me 1 second. And so it says in the 6th chapter, the 5th verse of Genesis, 6th chapter, 5th verse, V'yar Hashem ki rabba ra'at adam ba'aretz, that God saw that the evil doings of man were very great in the earth. V'kol yetzer machshavot libo, and all of the inclinations of his heart, rak ra koliyam, were just all day long were evil. That's the heart of man. But then it says, Vayinachem Hashem ki asat Adam, that God regretted that he had made the man, ba'aretz, in the earth, vayit atsev elibo, and he was, from the word, he was like sad. He regretted in his heart that he had made man. So this is talking about God's heart. So that's why the Midrash is saying, because we have a pasuk where it talks about God's heart. But what does that mean? What does that mean exactly? So here we have, it's very close to the fourth one, the one we just did about the tzaddikim. Just like the second one about taking counsel with each individual day is a little different, but it's connected to the first one, which was counsel with all of creation. So here, it's the idea that within God, of course, is everything. So when it says, let us make man, since everything ever created is a part of God and came from God and has a spark of God, here God is consulting with himself. I mean, as simple as that sounds, is that within God is everything. And so God is consulting with himself. But here the heart, again, relates to the feminine aspect of God. Where we'll say the mind is more the masculine. Obviously, every feminine has a mind, and every masculine has a heart. But we're using this allegorically, metaphorically. And so God is taking counsel with his own heart. God's, we'll call it inner consciousness. And this is where we get to the place of mystery as to, well, why did God create the world in the first place? And this we dealt with last week, giving 4 different reasons why perhaps God decided to create the world. But here, God is, in a sense, going through an inner dialogue with his own inner being, his own heart, like we use in English, the heart of the matter, getting to the heart of the matter. So these are the 5 opinions of this midrash, and it's just very enlightening how it gives us a perspective of a human being's place in creation. Here, the last creation is mankind. And in a sense, a human being is a small world. The whole world is included in it. And in a sense, the entire cosmos is just a big Adam. In fact, the Gemara even says it. First of all, it says that Adam could see from one end of the world to the other. And another one says he was as big as the whole world. So here we're talking about this idea of macrocosm and microcosm, the connections between above and below. I'm trying to summarize everything that we learned today, that man is the balance between the upper worlds and the lower worlds, between the soul and the body, spiritual and physical, and that all of the world is included in human consciousness. And this makes fertile ground for creative expression. But it's also in this week's Parsha, V'yetze Yitzchak l'suach b'sadeh, that Yitzchak went out to converse in the fields towards the evening. And we're told that the language of converse is the language of prayer. And it's also the language of meditation. But it's significant that he was going out to nature to pray, to converse with God. This obviously is the biblical source of Rabbi Nachman's Hitbodedut, going out into nature and communing with God, conversing with God. And I think everyone knows those special moments in nature where it brings us to God, whether it's a magnificent waterfall or mesmerized by the seashore or climbing up the mountain or watching the clouds, whatever it is, that it's not just it's beautiful, it's inspirational. There's something that touches inside because that is part of who we are. And for those who remember, Joni Mitchell's song about Woodstock. You remember this, and this is going back 50 years now. We are stardust and we are golden, and we have to get ourselves back to the garden. I'm bringing this up because this idea of we are stardust. And so actually, physics confirms that all matter is basically stardust, because in the beginning of the cosmos, so when stars would explode, they created the elements and the possibility of life on Earth. And so this idea that we are stardust it's quite literal. And that's why we might go into this deeper in a future class. But when it says that God created Adam from afar, from the dust of the earth. Well, the dust of the earth is actually stardust. It comes, the whole cosmos, the whole universe had a part in creating the possibility of life on this planet. And so this idea, when God says, let us make human beings and he consulted with the creation. It's more than just consulted. God included creation in the formation of mankind. So I think this is a good place to stop. As usual, I'm watching these great chats come in, and and part of me would like to just jump on them, but if I did, I would lose the whole flow. So anyways, we're going to end with a blessing, and I just want to bless everyone to really think about this idea that an Adam is the whole world. The whole world is a small Adam, and Adam is, and the world is a big Adam. Adam is a small world, and the world is a big Adam, because that like puts everything together. It includes our consciousness with everything. And I remember one of the classes, maybe some of you remember this, I read this whole thing from Rav Kook, where he basically gives over this idea in an incredible poetic, Kabbalistic, mystical fashion, this idea of feeling one with the entire creation. So I want to bless us all that we really can meditate on this, and we can make it part of our lives.